Thank you very much, kasamang Noel, sa inyong ginawang pagpapakilala. Let me clear the deck by greeting the official dome of the Katipunan ng Kamalayang Kayumanggi, led by Attorney Charlie Serapio, its founding elder, and the Secretary General, Amor Mostrales. I also greet all the delegates to this convention. Delegates coming from Metro Manila, Luzon, Visayas, and as far as Mindanao. Mga kasama at mga kababayan, let me congratulate the Katipunan ng Kamalayang Kayumanggi Political Party as it holds its national convention today. I take it that you will be participating in our national elections to be held in May 2022. Observers of our political odyssey concur in the opinion that our coming election may determine the rise or fall of our decaying democracy. With your leave, allow me to discuss the various challenges to our democracy today. Let me start with the history of democracy and the development of its different phases. In its first historical phase, democracy was immediately dismissed as a government of the mob by the early philosophers like Plato. And so the idea immediately evaporated from the face of the earth for a long time, indeed for 1,000 years. Democracy, however, was not to remain in the graveyard forever. The resurrection of democracy and its second historical phase started around the 10th century. In its resurrected form, it slowly took the shape of representative democracy, or the indirect rule by representatives of the people. But even in its resurrected form, it took representative democracy up to the early years of the 21st century in order to prevail. Along its difficult and tortuous way, democracy has to break down all accretions of antipathies to the notion that the people are truly sovereign. And these antipathies came from powerful secular and sectarian forces. They came from kings who refused to give up their royal prerogative to rule the people by virtue alone of their bloodline. They also came from theological tyrants who claimed infallibility beyond the spiritual realm. They also came from dictators who hallucinated that they knew everything and could order everyone around. It took numerous national wars, regional wars, and 2 world wars for representative democracy to beat the last of the isms, that is communism. Even then, in the course of navigating its history, democracy metamorphosed into several variants. Democracy has appeared dressed as aristocratic democracy, as a social democracy, as Christian democracy, and as socialist democracy. But there is no doubt that today, democracy is the dominant form of government throughout the world. By the end of the 20th century, 119 out of a total of 192 countries could be called electoral democracies. And they cover 38% of the world's population. That is why no less than the Nobel Prize winner, Amartya Sen, considers democracy as, quote, a universal value. For more than 100 years, we Filipinos have been aspiring to become a full democracy. And so as we prepare for the coming elections, this 2022, we should ask ourselves the tormenting question: how does the world view our state of democracy? Freedom House is a US-based non-profit, non-partisan organization that supports democratic change, monitors freedom, and advocates for democracy and human rights. Every year, it evaluates the state of freedom all over the world. And they categorize countries as free, not free, and partly free. For so many times, and for the nth time, the Philippines has been rated only as partly free and not as a fully free democratic state. This has been the sorry story of our democracy. Since we won our independence from Spain, we have exerted robust efforts to establish a democratic regime in our country, not only as a theoretical construct, but as a reality on the ground. We made that covenant in the Malolos Constitution, as well as in our 1935, 1973, and 1987 constitutions. But after a century of efforts, our dream to establish a democratic state is turning out to be a frustration, indeed a cruel delusion. Hence, as we prepare for the 2022 elections, I wish to invite you to focus on some of the reasons why we have not solved this perennial problem besetting our democracy. First, consider the kind and the quality of our representative democracy. In a representative democracy, the people elect the officials who will govern them. Election, therefore, is the life force of a representative democracy, for through the proper choice of rulers, it avoids the unwieldiness of a democracy where the people rule directly. But it is also its Achilles heel. For through elections, the government can be captured by a small elite that promotes its selfish interests and disregards the bigger interests of the people. Hence, the electoral process in a democracy must meet some irreducible requirements. For one, the conduct of elections from beginning to the end must be free from any form of unfairness, protected from any species of fraud, and insulated from any degree of discrimination. Unfortunately, the evidence that our electoral process has failed to pass this basic criteria cries to high heaven. Our elections are highly driven by money, sometimes even by dirty money. Today, the estimate is that a presidential candidate needs 50 billion pesos to have a decent run for the position. And undeniably, our elections are also controlled by political dynasties. Political dynasties that continue to monopolize power in almost all our electoral units. Political dynasties are poison to the principle of majority rule, which is the essence of democracy. Political dynasties choke the access to political power by the people in the same way the old monarchs and the modern dictators claim the exclusive franchise on the right to rule. Hence, political dynasties result in a government of the few and a government for the few. These dynasties fail to produce governments that can be trusted to look for the overlook. Secondly, I submit that we can never attain the full status of full democracy unless we respect with the unfailing fidelity the rule of law. In unadorned language, the rule of law simply means that those who govern the people must be under the law, for no one is above the law. And history teaches us that the rule of law is the sine qua non for democracy to start. And it is still the sine qua non for democracy not only to start, but for democracy to survive. As well pointed out by almost all political scientists, and I quote their findings. From the start, the state must be organized on the basis of the rule of law. Those who govern must be accountable to the people. The transparency of the governing process must permit the citizenry to keep a watchful eye on government officials in order to detect corruption and punish those who perpetrate it. Corruption can strangle a democracy at any stage of its development. Legislatures must have real law-making powers, as well as the right to hold the executive up to scrutiny. The judiciary must be independent of political manipulation by the executive and legislative branches. And the military must abide by the rules of democratic government and accept civilian control. End of their findings. Sad to state, the rule of law is weak in our country. It has a spine that is as strong as the spaghetti. Lawlessness reigns king in various levels of society. Lawlessness rules in our streets where simple traffic rules are not enforced. Lawlessness has also reared its ugly head in some branches of government, where not infrequently the fidelity given to the constitutional principle of checks and balances goes no further than a salivary salutation. When the sanctity of these touchstone principles is trust, the inevitable result is the eruption of corruption. Third, I submit that if we want to qualify as a full democracy, there are certain democratic norms which we must satisfy. These norms provide democracy's moral content, and undeniably, among the norms that command the highest importance are equality and inclusiveness. The norm of equality demands that human rights must be equally distributed and guaranteed to everyone. The norm of inclusiveness requires that economic progress should not be restricted to the rich, but should include the poor, for democracy cannot thrive on the poverty of the many. Studies on democracy overwhelmingly show that, I quote, wealthy and upper middle income countries tend to be democracies and semi-democracies. And conversely, poor countries tend to be semi-authoritarian. End of quote. In the case of the Philippines, democracy rests on a foundation of sinking sand because it has a missing middle class. And worse, the galloping gap between the rich and the poor is getting more unconscionable and more intolerable. The statistics say that in our country, 4 million families own nothing, while the top 50 families own everything. We do not need the omniscience of the divine to make the warning that our democracy cannot succeed where you have a multitude of people with heads without roofs, with backs without shirts, with stomachs without food, with feet without shoes. It hurts that millions of our countrymen migrate to other nations and risk all the maladies of maltreatment in order to escape the more virulent economic miseries in our country. Today, democracy is going through its third historical stage. From a direct democracy to representative democracy, and to what the writer John Keane calls monitory democracy. Monitory democracy means a democracy where those who govern are monitored by the people moment by moment. This has come about because of the declining trust of people on their elected and unelected representatives. Hence, the metamorphosis of representative democracy to monitory democracy, where watchdogs, guard dogs, and barking dogs of all kind keep a watchful eye on their representatives and agents in government. The emergence of a monitory democracy is patent in our 1987 Constitution. It is the reason for the establishment of such independent bodies as the Commission on Audit, the Commission on Human Rights, the Office of the Ombudsman, an independent judiciary, and an interventionist civil society. Our Constitution recognizes that the people are the ultimate watchdog of their own interests. For this reason, our Constitution redesigned our state not only as Republican in character, but democratic in its essence. It again stressed and re-stressed that sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. In other words, it considered the people as the son of sovereignty, while their representatives are merely the moons that reflect the people's sovereignty. And it is for that reason that the Constitution gave the power to the sovereign people to remove through recall some elected officials. The reason why the Constitution gave to the people the power to enact local and national laws. And the reason why it gave the power to change the Constitution itself to the people, a power which, for all intents and purposes, is the power to create and recreate government itself. I keep on stressing that the Constitution merely affirmed and did not grant the sovereign power of the people. For in truth, the sovereignty of the people is inherent in them as a people and cannot be granted by any piece of paper, even if that tissue of a paper is called a constitution. The power of the people as sovereign preceded and antedated all man-made constitutions. There is no power higher than the sovereign power of the people, as all other powers are merely delegated by the people. Hence, the delegated power to execute laws given to the chief executive, the delegated power to enact laws given to Congress, the delegated power to interpret laws given to the Supreme Court cannot be used nor abused to nullify the sovereignty of the people. And to further fortify the power of the people, the 1987 Constitution made it the duty of the military to protect the people whenever they exercise their sovereign power. Let me end by saying that we will never be a full democracy unless and until we fully enthrone our people as the real sovereign in our country. If democracy has not flowered in the Philippines, it is because the people have been betrayed by some of their so-called representatives time and time again. If democracy has not been deeply rooted in our soil, it is because it has often been hijacked by a small but powerful cabal of political and economic elite. In other words, the story of democracy in the Philippines is the story of betrayals after betrayals of the interests of the people. Democracy will succeed in the Philippines only and only if we can stop these betrayals. Let us begin the task itself with ourselves, for we are the people. Mabuhay ang Katipunan ng Kamalayang Pilipinas, and may God bless us all.